many of us have an idea of what we think domestic violence is, but you can get caught in that mindset of, it's not going to happen to me, so I don't need to think about it so much. But that's obviously not always the case. In your work in family court, what have you found are some of the common misconceptions about domestic violence?
Well, probably the greatest misconception is that it has to be physical. A lot of times people hear the term domestic violence and they assume it means a husband hitting a wife or a dating partner assaulting, the other partner. But domestic violence can get a lot more involved than that. It can involve non-physical forms of abuse, harassment, cyber harassment, stalking. Sometimes people are in an abusive relationship and they don't even recognize that they were in an abusive relationship for some period of time. So that's one misconception. And another huge misconception that many in the public have is the question they ask sometimes: why doesn't the person who is being abused just leave? As if it's a free voluntary choice to just pick up and go. And there are so many complicating factors in a domestic situation which can make it very difficult for someone to leave even if they're being abused. There may be children involved. There may be financial dependency. There may be all types of emotional and psychological issues going on in the relationship, perhaps a codependent relationship. There may be generalized fear. There may be public shame. For some people may feel that way even though they've done nothing wrong. So it can get very complicated, and the study of domestic violence has really taken on, much more steam, much more strength in the last, I'd say, 10 to 20 years.
Now, Joni, through your work, you found PTSD and other mental health factors can have a major impact on domestic violence, the cycle of domestic violence. How does our understanding of mental health as a society, including access to mental health service, play into this equation?
Yeah, well, the post-traumatic stress becomes a very important issue because in my experience working with people, it stifles people. So it really generates an underlying fear. And they think that when they have mental health challenges that they're going to go on maybe some medication to address, the PTSD or the anxiety or the depression. But one of the biggest misconceptions is medications do not skill build. So what they do is they may assist in their attention, their ability to focus, and learn, because sitting, attending, and focusing are the prerequisites of learning. So many people think, oh, gee, let me take the medication, and then that's going to make everything go away. They don't understand that it doesn't have that skill building component. Many people want the trauma to go away, and trauma doesn't go away. We can't erase events in our lives, and they have to learn how to manage it. And triggers can happen at any time. You don't know when those triggers are going to happen. So when they understand that response and they're getting that, there's an alert that there's some type of threat or the danger, they can learn to push that pause button. When they learn to push that pause button, it becomes very important, because when you go to high levels of those hormone surges, you're actually put into the part of the brain where you become very impulsive, very reactionary, and you go on to the what ifs, what you believe is happening. And since there's no logical thinking, there is no decision-making capabilities. So we really have to teach people to manage it so that they can get to the part of the brain that is non-reactionary, that it looks logically at things, and they're able to make informed decisions.
Now, you talk about trauma and skill building. Those are particularly important through your work. I know you found this for children who witness domestic violence and other sorts of trauma. Can you explain how we can help children who do have to deal with those scenarios?
Yeah, it becomes very important because we have to recognize that everybody has their individual responses. Some people may adapt to it as being norm. They're learning. We're not born with knowledge, we're born with the ability to learn, and if that's what they're learning, then that is what they just might adapt. And we have to look at what happens when the children even go into young adults, or adults. Are they going to not recognize the signs of any type of abuse because they've adapted it to the norm? Have they become a perpetrator themselves, because of that learned behavior? Or as adults, have they gone into where they become more empathetic and they take an opposite approach and they will not, carry on any of the traits of the abuser? So it's very individualized.
Earlier this year, President Biden signed into law the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. Can you describe for our viewers how that action will help increase awareness and enforcement?
What the federal bill does, it does several things that are helpful. First of all, it's a funding bill. So it provides a lot of funding for state agencies and nonprofit organizations to basically provide services and resources to survivors of domestic violence, as well as training for law enforcement, for educators, things like that. Number two, it provides a great roadmap, in my opinion, of public policy straight from Washington about the importance of preventing or fighting domestic violence. Because if you read through the act, and it's a lengthy act, but if you read through even the summaries, you'll see that they focus on inclusive type language to try to protect and recognize that there's been domestic violence in a lot of underserved communities, the disabled, the elderly, like Joni was talking about, in rural areas, young children, the LGBTQ community, the Native American community, and which is important, obviously, in New Mexico and other parts of the country. And also, from a legal standpoint, the bill is very important in New Mexico because it provides tribal jurisdiction on certain criminal acts that previously did not exist or existed on almost a limited basis. It was expanded so that if domestic violence abuse occurs on tribal lands, that there can be consequences against a defendant greater than there were previously.
Anything that people should know about domestic violence, about their understanding, about our society's understanding during this month?
Yes. First of all, if anyone feels that they are the subject of domestic violence, they should seek help. And there are lots of different ways to seek help. You can consult, there are many good organizations in New Mexico and throughout the country, nonprofit organizations, governmental organizations, that their whole function, or a large part of why they are there, is to help people who are in a situation where it's abusive, where it's violent. Domestic violence doesn't just go away on its own. To stay silent about it, even though you can understand why some people historically have chosen to, very often it gets worse.
Joni, final word to you. What should people know during this month about resources, about how they should handle a situation like this?
Well, I really think there needs to be a public awareness because, as Larry alluded to, many people don't talk about the abuse that's going on, and there's various reasons for that. We should look at any type of change that we see occurring in an individual, and to be very comfortable to even talk about it. Because one of the things that I do want the public to know, and this is a very big misconception, because when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about depression and people feel that there's no way out, they start to contemplate suicide. And people think that if they ask somebody if they are suicidal, that they're going to put that thought into their head, and that is not the case. It's not the case at all. There's a lot of research on it. It's just, again, another conversational starter. And I think that's what the public needs to be aware of, the vigilance, the awareness, and to take action on that.